Rowan stopped before what should have been impossible. 100-foot transport raft sold for exactly 1 copper. The rotting wood creaked under the strong sun of the Tescan River, and the main cabin looked like a forgotten prayer floating in the mud. But when he forced open the warped oak door 3 hours later, he discovered the deal came with something the seller forgot to mention. Someone already claimed that roof. The sun had been sitting low and mean over the Tescan River for most of the morning when Rowan first saw the raft. It was tied to a half-sunken dock at the edge of Goldport's southern waterfront, where the smell of fish guts and river mud mixed into something that could make a strong man gag. The wood was dark with age, swollen in some places, cracked in others. Moss had claimed the lower hull like a slow green army. The main cabin leaned slightly to the left, as if exhausted by years of neglect. Rowan stood with his arms crossed, studying it. His boots were already soaking through at the toes from the wet dock planks. Behind him, the merchant Bracker was talking fast, the way men talk when they want a deal done before the other person thinks too hard. 100-foot vessel, solid frame underneath all that surface rot. Good bones, I tell you. Just needs a skilled hand. Bracker's eyes were small and always moving, like a rat calculating the nearest exit. I'd keep her myself, but I'm heading north for the season. Can't be dragging property behind me. Rowan said nothing. He walked the length of the dock, pressing his boot against the hull at intervals, feeling for soft spots. There were many, but the main beams, where he could see them, were thick old ironwood, the kind they didn't cut anymore. How much? Rowan asked. 1 copper, said Bracker. Rowan turned around slowly. Bracker smiled, showing 2 missing teeth. I just need her off the registry before the harbour tax comes due. 1 copper and she's yours, title and all. Rowan reached into the worn leather pouch at his belt. He had 2 coppers in there, all that remained after 5 years of careful saving. Most of it spent that very morning on rope, caulking tar, and a new chisel he had needed for months. Every coin before that had been earned cleaning barnacles off other men's ships, sanding decks in the summer heat, patching hulls for merchants who paid late and tipped never. He had been saving for 5 years, not for this raft specifically, just for something that was his. He placed 1 copper in Bracker's palm. The merchant closed his fingers around it like a trap snapping shut, handed over a folded paper with a harbour seal, and walked away without looking back. His boots moved quickly through the mud, putting distance between himself and the transaction. Rowan filed that detail away without fully understanding it yet. He stood alone on the dock with his new property. The Tescan moved dark and slow around it, carrying the usual debris downstream. A dead bird, a broken crate, something that might have been a boot. Rowan allowed himself 1 moment of something close to happiness. It was small and careful, the way joy tends to be when it hasn't had much practice. He had a roof, he had walls, he had a workspace on the water, which was all he had ever wanted since he was a boy watching the shipbuilders from a distance, knowing he had the hands for it, but never the money. He rolled up his sleeves and climbed aboard. The deck was slick. Several planks needed replacing immediately. The railing on the port side was completely gone, which was a danger. The cabin door was oak and had warped badly in its frame. It took him 3 full hours of work with a mallet and a flat iron bar before it groaned open. The smell that came out was old wood, mildew, something metallic under it all, and something else he couldn't name right away. He stepped into the dim cabin. His eyes adjusted. The room was empty. Dusty shelves, a broken lantern, a cold iron stove in the center. Then, from beneath the floorboards, he heard it. A step, slow, deliberate, like something that knew exactly where the creaking boards were and had learned to avoid them. Rowan's hand closed around the haft of his carpenter's axe. The raft was supposed to be empty. Rowan did not move. He stood in the middle of the cabin with his axe in his hand and listened. The sound beneath the floor came again, then stopped. Whatever was down there had heard him too. The metallic smell was stronger now. Not blood exactly. Something older, like iron left in rain. He looked around the cabin quickly. The floorboards were uneven, patched in different places by different hands over what must have been many years. Near the cold stove, one section was slightly raised. A hatch. He had missed it in the dim light. Rowan moved to the side of the room and pressed his back against the wall, axe ready, watching the hatch. Nothing happened for a long moment. Then the hatch lifted slowly. A pair of hands appeared first, green, strong fingers with short, blunt nails. They gripped the edge of the hatch with the practiced ease of someone who had done this exact motion many times. Then came shoulders, wide, wrapped in rough linen gone grey with washing, then a head. She was an orc. Her hair was black and pulled back with strips of cured leather. Her skin was a deep, vivid green, the colour of moss on wet stone, but brighter, alive. Her ears came to gentle points. Her jaw was strong, and when she breathed, Rowan caught the faintest suggestion of small tusks, barely visible at the corners of her mouth. She was tall, very tall. She had to duck to clear the low ceiling of the cabin. She looked at Rowan the way someone looks at a problem they have been expecting. Not afraid, not angry, tired, mostly. The kind of tired that comes from months of being careful. "You must be the new owner," she said. Her voice was low and even, with a roughness at the edges that was not unpleasant. Rowan realized he had not breathed for several seconds. He let the air out slowly. The axe stayed in his hand, but he lowered it a few inches. "I bought this raft this morning," he said. "I know," she said. "I heard you working the door." "You were here the whole time?" "Yes." He stared at her. She waited. "Braca didn't mention you," Rowan said. "No," she said. He wouldn't. She climbed the rest of the way out of the hatch and straightened to her full height. She was easily a head and a half taller than him. The linen she wore was clean despite its age. Her hands, when she let them rest at her sides, were calloused in the same places as his own. Work hands. "My name is Maela," she said. "I have been keeping this place." Rowan looked around at the cabin, at the swept floors beneath the dust, at the patched walls, at the iron stove, which, now that he looked closer, had been recently cleaned, its grate free of old ash. "You fixed things," he said. "The hull was taking on water in 2 places when I arrived," she said. "I sealed them. The main beam on the south side had a crack. I reinforced it with iron strapping I found in the hold. The stove chimney was blocked. I cleared it." She said these things without pride or complaint. The way a person lists facts. Rowan thought about the ironwood beams he had tapped earlier, the ones that felt solid. He had assumed they had simply aged well. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 3 years, she said. 3 years, while the harbour tax piled up, while Braca waited to sell for whatever he could get, while Maela kept the raft floating. Rowan set the axe down against the wall. "Why?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the Tescan moved past them, slow and indifferent. "Because I had nowhere else to go," she said. Then her eyes moved to the window. Something shifted in them. The calm cracked just slightly, just for a second. "And because the people who want what I carry have not stopped looking." Rowan pulled the only stool in the cabin away from the wall and sat down. He rested his elbows on his knees and looked at Maela, who remained standing near the hatch. She had not moved far from it. He noticed that. The exit was always close. "Who's looking for you?" he asked. She did not answer right away. She crossed her arms and looked at the floor, as if deciding how much to say to a man she had known for about 4 minutes. "My name is Maela of the Iron Peaks clan," she said finally. "My father was a master of mines. He spent 30 years mapping the silver veins beneath the iron reaches. He built records, careful records, survey maps, ownership papers, extraction charts, his life's work." Rowan waited. "Men wanted those records," she said. not to honor them, to steal them. A group of human mining contractors working with a rival clan that had already sold its honor, arranged for an accident in my father's mine, a structural collapse. My father and 11 of his workers died inside. She said it plainly, the way people say things that have already been grieved, past the point of breaking. The contractors then produced forged documents claiming they held the mining rights. The rival clan backed their claim. The land was taken. The mines were taken. She looked up at him. I was the only one who had seen the real papers. My father kept them on the raft, not in the mine office. He didn't trust walls that other men had built. Smart man, Rowan said quietly. He was, she said. She moved to the stove and ran one hand along its edge. It was a habit, unconscious. The touch of someone checking that something is still there. I took the papers before the contractors could search the raft. I fled. They have been hunting me since. She looked at him directly. Braca knew I was here. I let him know, because I needed someone with a deed to the raft or the harbor would seize it eventually. He agreed to shelter me in exchange for a percentage of the mine value if the case ever reached court. She paused. Then the hunters came close. Braca decided the risk was no longer worth his percentage. So he sold the raft for 1 copper to make it someone else's problem, Rowan said. Yes. Rowan sat back. He looked at the ceiling. There was a dark water stain in the corner that he hadn't noticed before. He would need to check the roof seam up there. Who are the hunters? He asked. Men hired by a mercenary captain named Gorthak, she said. He does the dirty work for the mining contractors. He was the one who oversaw the collapse. He knows if I reach a crown judge with those documents, his employers fall and he falls with them. The name meant nothing to Rowan, but the picture it made was clear enough. He had come to the Tescan dock that morning with 2 coppers and a plan to build a quiet life. A workshop, a contract or 2, maybe someday a real boat of his own. The plan had been careful and small and entirely achievable. He looked at Maela. She was watching him with that same steady, tired expression. No pleading in it. She was not asking him for anything. She was simply waiting to see what he would do, the way a person waits when they have already accepted the worst, and anything better would just be a surprise. Rowan picked up his axe and stood. "Show me where the papers are," he said. Something shifted in her face. Small, quick, gone before it fully formed. "Why?" she asked. "Because if someone comes for them, I need to know what I'm protecting," he said. She studied him for a long moment. Then she turned and knelt beside the cold stove. Her fingers found a gap between the floorboards that Rowan never would have spotted. She pressed, and a section of floor tilted up. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth and bound with cured leather straps, was a bundle the size of a large book. She held it out to him. He took it carefully, as if he understood even then that he was holding the weight of a dead man's life. He unrolled the maps on the floor between them. They were extraordinary. Rowan had worked with builders and engineers all his life, and he knew careful drafting when he saw it. These were not rough sketches. They were layered surveys drawn in fine ink, annotated in 2 languages, cross-referenced with depth measurements and vein widths. Whoever had made these had spent years learning to see underground. Maela crouched beside him and pointed without touching. The red lines are the primary silver veins. The numbers beside each are extraction yield estimates per quarter. The blue marks are water tables. My father mapped those separately to prevent flooding. She moved her finger across the paper. The black boundary lines show the legal claim borders. And here, she tapped a folded document tucked inside the oilcloth, are the original ownership deeds, stamped by the Iron Peaks Land Registry before it was burned. "Burned," Rowan repeated. "The registry building caught fire 2 weeks after my father died," she said. "A very convenient fire." He rolled the maps carefully and returned them to the oilcloth. He did not speak for a moment. Outside, a bird was calling from somewhere along the riverbank. The Tescan made its low, constant sound against the hull. "How many men does Gorthak run?" he asked. "He usually travels with 3 or 4, she said. "He prefers small groups, harder to track, and enough to take down one person without witnesses." "Does he know you're here specifically, on this raft in Goldport?" "Bracker would have told him by now," she said. It was not a guess. It was the simple logic of a person who had learned to think like someone being hunted. Rowan stood and moved to the cabin's narrow side window. The dock outside was empty. The afternoon light was slanting down through the water oaks on the eastern bank. A pair of pelicans sat on a post further up the river, unbothered, for now it was quiet. He turned back. "What does Gorthak look like?" he asked. "Tall for a human. Scar across his left cheek, from the jaw to the eye, from a mine cable that snapped. He dresses in reinforced leather, not armor. He likes crossbows. His men tend to follow his lead in equipment." She described them with the specificity of someone who had watched from cover. Rowan nodded slowly. He was doing a kind of calculation, not numbers, but weight. The weight of what was being asked of him by circumstances. Even if Maela was asking nothing aloud, he was a carpenter, a skilled one, but still. He had a hammer, 2 chisels, a flat iron bar, and the axe. He had a single copper left to his name. He had a raft that still needed 2 weeks of work before it could safely move on the river. He thought about the dock favelas where he had grown up, the way the other kids looked at the harbour masters, the way the harbour masters looked through them. "Some debts you don't choose, they find you. There's a problem," he said. Maela looked at him. "If Gorthak comes here and there's a confrontation, the harbour authority will come eventually. They'll want to know what happened and why. And if it comes out that you've been living here without papers, without any status in Goldport, they will hand me over to whoever makes the better legal argument," she said, "which will be Gorthak's employers, who have lawyers and friends in every registry from here to the Iron Reaches. So we need to move fast," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "We?" Rowan shrugged, the gesture smaller than the decision behind it. "I spent 5 years earning that copper. I'm not handing the raft over to mercenaries on the first day." Then from outside came the dull, rhythmic sound of horses moving through mud. Both of them went still. Rowan moved to the window. Maela was already beside him, one hand on the frame, head tilted to listen. 3 riders. They came along the eastern bank trail, moving at a walk, not hurrying. That was worse, somehow, than if they had come at a gallop. Men who gallop are going somewhere. Men who walk like that are arriving. The leader rode a grey horse the colour of old ash. He was tall in the saddle, wide in the shoulders. Even from the distance, Rowan could see the line of scar tissue running up the left side of his face. "Gorthak," Maela said quietly. The name settled into the cabin like a stone into water. His 2 riders flanked him, both wearing the dark reinforced leather she had described. One had a crossbow resting on his saddle horn. The other carried a short-handled club at his belt. They moved without urgency, which meant they believed they had already won. Gorthak stopped his horse about 50 meters from the dock. He stood up in his stirrups and surveyed the raft, then the dock, then the surrounding bank, with the methodical attention of someone checking the count of their assets. "We have maybe a few minutes before he decides to come closer," Rowan said. "He will not rush," Maela confirmed. "He believes I have nowhere to go." Rowan looked around the cabin. His tools were on the deck outside, still in their leather roll. The axe was against the wall, the flat bar, the mallet. He thought about each one, what it was built to do, whether it could serve another purpose if needed. He was not a fighting man. He wanted to be clear about that, at least to himself. He had won 2 brawls in his life, both on docks, both because the other man was drunker than he was. That was the full extent of his experience with violence. But he had also grown up watching what happened to people who backed down. "Is there a back way off this raft?" he asked. "Not one that goes anywhere useful," she said. "The rear of the raft faces the deeper channel. The current there runs fast. If you went in without a boat, you'd surface a quarter-mile downstream, if you surfaced at all." "So the dock is the only way off?" "Yes." Gorthak had dismounted now. He handed his reins to one of his riders and stood at the edge of the dock, looking at the raft. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "I know you're in there, Orc. Come out and let's talk about what you owe, and maybe this ends quiet." His voice carried easily across the water. It was a practiced voice, a man who had used it often in similar situations. Maela's jaw tightened. She said nothing. Rowan felt the familiar pressure of a problem that did not have a good solution, only a less bad one. He had grown up solving those. "I have an idea," he said, "but it requires me to go out first, alone." She looked at him. "If you show yourself, this becomes about you," he said. "If I go out, it's just a carpenter arguing about his property. I can delay, I can confuse, I can buy time." "For what?" "For anything," he said. "Time is the only currency I have right now." Gorthak called out again, louder this time, less patient. Rowan picked up his axe, then set it down again. He picked up the mallet instead. Better for a man holding a tool to look like a man who works with tools, not a man preparing for a fight. He tucked it through his belt loop. "Stay in here," he said, "no matter what you hear." Maela said nothing, but when he glanced back, her hand had closed around the bone-handled knife at her belt. He stepped out onto the deck. The afternoon sun hit him flat and warm. The river glittered. Gorthak stood at the dock's edge with the patient stillness of a man who was used to waiting because he always got what he waited for. Rowan walked to the railing and looked down at him. "Can I help you?" he said, the way a man says it when he knows the answer is no. Gorthak looked him over. It was not a quick look. It went from Rowan's worn boots up to his resin-stained jacket to the mallet hanging from his belt, the kind of look that prices a man. "Where is the orc?" Gorthak said. "Which orc?" Rowan said. "A mistake, possibly, but it was what came out." One of the mounted riders made a quiet sound that might have been a laugh. Gorthak did not react. His expression did not change. "The one living on this raft," he said. "Don't make me ask twice." "I bought this raft this morning," Rowan said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded paper with the harbour seal. He held it up. "Title of ownership, stamped and signed. I've been on board for 3 hours, alone." Gorthak's eyes moved from the paper to Rowan's face. He was calculating, the same way Rowan was, but with better odds. "My tracker saw 2 figures in the cabin window an hour ago," Gorthak said. "Your tracker needs spectacles," Rowan said, "or a better line of work." Another silence. The Tescan moved beneath them. A heron passed low over the water on the far bank, its wing beats slow and disinterested. "You're a carpenter," Gorthak said. It was not a question. "That's right." "Bought this wreck for what? A few silvers?" "1 copper, Rowan said. Something moved in Gorthak's expression, a slight reassessment. He had not expected the truth, probably. "Then, you're a smart man who made a cheap investment," Gorthak said. "And smart men don't get themselves killed over cheap investments. Tell me where she is. I'll have my men search the raft, find what I'm looking for, and you'll have your property back by sundown. No harm, no trouble." Rowan let that offer sit in the air for a moment. He looked at the crossbow resting on the first rider's saddle. He looked at the club at the second rider's belt. He looked at Gorthak's hands, which had not moved toward a weapon yet, which meant the offer was at least partially genuine, which made it more dangerous, because it meant accepting it was actually possible. "What are you looking for?" Rowan asked. "Property that belongs to my employers," Gorthak said. "What kind of property?" That's not your concern. It is, if you're planning to search my raft looking for it. Gorthak's patience had a flaw. Rowan could feel it getting closer. Last chance, Gorthak said. After this, the conversation stops being polite. Rowan looked at him evenly. He thought about Maela standing in the cabin behind him, her calloused hands, 3 years of solitary work keeping a raft floating for a future she wasn't sure would come. He thought about Bracker's quick feet in the mud and what it meant that a man would sell a home for 1 copper just to be rid of his own cowardice. "There's no one on this raft but me," Rowan said. "If you have a legal warrant to search, show it and I'll stand aside. If you don't, then you're a man threatening a legal property owner on a public harbour dock, and that's a matter for the Goldport Authority, not for whatever arrangement you have with whoever pays you." He said it clearly, not fast, not aggressive. The way you lay a beam into place, square, level, no room for argument. Gorthak stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked past Rowan to the cabin door, then back. "You're making a very large mistake," he said. "Possibly," Rowan agreed. Gorthak turned and walked back toward his horse. He did not mount. He just stood beside it, speaking to his riders in a low voice. They were not leaving. They were settling in, waiting. Rowan kept his face neutral and walked back to the cabin. Inside, Maela had her ear pressed to the wall. She looked at him as he entered. "He doesn't have a warrant," Rowan said quietly. "He's going to wait us out." Maela exhaled slowly. Then she said, "I should go to him. End this." "No," Rowan said. "Rowan, no," he said again, simply. "We think of another way." They spent the next hour thinking of another way. It was not a comfortable hour. Maela sat on the floor near the stove, arms resting on her knees, thinking out loud in a low voice. She had a habit, Rowan noticed, of drawing small shapes with her finger on the floor when she was working through a problem. Circles, mostly. The habit of someone who had spent a great deal of time alone. Rowan stood at the window, watching the dock. Gorthak had moved his horse up to a low tree at the edge of the bank trail and tied it there. His 2 riders were on the ground now, one sitting on a log, one standing, both with clear sightlines to the dock and the raft. They had done this before. The positioning was too comfortable, too practiced. "The river," Rowan said. "You said yourself the back channel is too fast. For swimming, but not for a raft." Maela looked up. "If we cut the mooring lines and poled out," he said, "the current in the back channel would take us downstream, maybe a mile. They can't follow on horses without going around the Water Oaks bend, and that's a 20-minute ride minimum." She was quiet, working through it. "The raft is not in condition to navigate the back channel safely," she said. "The hull seam on the starboard quarter is still weak. I patched it with pine tar last winter, but it hasn't been tested under current. If the channel pushes us sideways against one of the submerged rocks, we'd take on water faster than we could bail. With Gorthak's men watching, we'd be in the river before help could reach us." She looked at him. "We'd be trading a standoff on land for a wreck in the water." Rowan absorbed that. He looked at the window again. Gorthak was still there, patient as rot. "The harbour office," he said. She looked at him with a new expression. "I have the deed. I'm a registered owner. As the deed holder, I have the right to file a complaint about unauthorized persons present on or near my property." He picked up his axe, then reconsidered. He set the axe down and took the mallet from his belt. Better to arrive at a harbour office looking like a working man, not someone heading for trouble. "I need to get to the harbour office, which means walking past Gorthak. He will stop you." "He can't. Stopping a deed holder from accessing public grounds is a violation of harbour code, and he doesn't have a warrant, which means he's already on thin ice." He tucked the deed paper inside his shirt. "He can threaten me. He can follow me. But if he touches me on that dock, he's the one breaking the law." Maela was quiet for a moment. Then, "And if he doesn't care about harbour code?" Rowan looked at the mallet in his hand. "Then we find out," he said. Outside, the light was still holding. He straightened his jacket and walked to the cabin door. This time, when he stepped out, one of Gorthak's riders stood up and watched him, hand on his club. The other nudged Gorthak, who turned from the tree where he'd been leaning and looked over. Rowan walked down the dock planks toward the bank, even and deliberate. Gorthak stepped into his path. "Where do you think you're going?" he said. "Harbour office," Rowan said. "Maintenance filing. Routine for new acquisitions." He held up the deed. "Legal requirement. Feel free to come along and watch." He did not stop walking. Gorthak stepped aside, barely, and let him pass. The harbour office was a squat building of grey stone at the north end of the Goldport waterfront, smelling of old paper and lamp oil. The clerk on duty was a thin man named Ellis, who had the look of someone who had been answering the same 3 questions for 15 years. Rowan laid the deed on the counter. "New acquisition on the South Dock," he said. "I need to file a residency registration and submit a request for harbour patrol inspection of the surrounding dock area. Possible trespassing concern." Ellis looked at the deed. He looked at Rowan. He picked up the paper and examined the seal. "1 copper," he said. Rowan was down to his last copper. He put it on the counter without hesitating. Ellis wrote. He stamped. He handed Rowan a carbon copy and a small yellow ticket. "Patrol will come by within the hour," Ellis said. "Standard procedure for trespassing complaints is verification of deed, visual inspection, and removal of unauthorized parties, if any are found." Rowan took the ticket. "One more thing," he said. "Is there any current warrant or legal instrument filed against the property at that dock address, or against any person residing there?" Ellis consulted a ledger, running his finger down columns. "No," he said, "nothing filed." "Thank you," Rowan said. He walked out. The walk back to the dock was shorter than the walk away from it. Gorthak had returned to his post by the tree, still watching. Rowan walked past them, without speaking, and went back up the dock planks and aboard the raft. Inside the cabin, Maela was standing close to the wall beside the window. "Patrol is coming," he said, "within the hour. No warrant filed against you or the property." She absorbed this without visible reaction, which was itself a kind of reaction. "Gorthak will not wait for them," she said. "I know. When he sees the patrol coming, he'll either leave or act before they arrive." "Yes, if he acts, then we deal with that," Rowan said. "But right now, the law is moving in our direction for the first time, and I'd rather meet it than run from it." Maela sat down on the edge of the hatch. It was the first time he had seen her sit since they had met. She looked at the floor. "Why are you doing this?" she said. It was not a challenge. It was a genuine question, the kind a person asks when they have been alone long enough that other people's motives have become genuinely mysterious. Rowan thought about it. "My father built boats for other men his whole life," he said. "Never owned one. When he died, they cleared his tools out of the shop the same day." He looked around the cabin, the swept floor, the sealed hull, the cleaned stove. "You kept this thing floating for 3 years. That's not a stranger's work. That's something else." She did not answer. Outside, the afternoon had shifted toward early evening. The light was softer now. From somewhere up the bank trail came the faint, far sound of horses moving at pace, more than 2 horses. Rowan went to the window. From the east, coming along the main harbour road, was a column of riders in iron-grey armour, 6 of them moving in tight formation. A patrol pennant flew from the lead rider's lance. Gorthak had seen them too. He was standing very still beside his horse. "That's not the harbour patrol," Rowan said. Maela was beside him instantly, looking through the other side of the window frame. "No," she said. Her voice had changed. "That is the Bloodstone Fortress garrison." The lead rider was a broad man with a grey beard and the kind of posture that came from 20 years of command. He rode directly toward the dock without slowing. "Do you know him?" Rowan asked. "I know the crest," she said. "That's Captain Silas." The name meant nothing to Rowan, but Gorthak had gone very still. Both his riders had moved back from the dock, and their hands had dropped away from their weapons. Whatever was coming, Gorthak did not want it near. Silas dismounted before his horse fully stopped, the way old soldiers do. One fluid motion that ends with both boots in the dirt and a hand already raised in the direction of Gorthak. "Hold," he said. One word. It carried. Gorthak held, not willingly. His jaw was working and his hands were at his sides, and he looked like a man who was calculating odds and not enjoying the results. Silas walked to the edge of the dock. He looked at the raft. He looked at Rowan, who was standing at the railing. "Is there a woman named Maela aboard?" he said. "Who's asking?" Rowan said. "Captain Aldrich Silas, Bloodstone Fortress, 3rd Garrison. I have a legal instrument." He held up a document folded and sealed. "Not a warrant for arrest, a summons for testimony. There's a difference." Rowan turned and looked back at the cabin. Maela was in the doorway. She had heard. She looked at the document in Silas's hand, then at Silas's face, then at Gorthak, who was watching her with a flatness in his expression that was not quite hatred, not quite calculation, but something unpleasant between the two. She stepped out onto the deck. Silas looked at her steadily. "I've been looking for you for 2 months, he said. "We found a witness, a miner named Pete Garrow, who was in the iron reaches the day your father's shaft collapsed. He saw the cable being cut." The air on the dock changed. Gorthak moved first. It was not a thoughtful move. It was the move of a man who sees a door closing and throws himself at it. He reached for the crossbow on his saddle, grabbing at it with both hands and spinning to face Maela on the deck. What happened next was quick and happened in the wrong order for Gorthak. Rowan was already moving. He had been watching Gorthak's hands the entire time Silas was speaking, because he had learned on the docks that it was always the hands. The mallet was still tucked at his belt from when he had returned from the harbour office. He grabbed it and threw it in one motion, the way you throw a wedge when you're driving it with another tool, all shoulder and no wrist. It caught Gorthak on the right arm, hard. The crossbow tilted, and the bolt fired into the mud of the bank 3 feet from nobody. Silas's men moved. 2 of them were off their horses before the bolt hit the ground. They covered the distance to Gorthak in seconds. He struggled briefly, then he stopped, because there were 2 large garrison soldiers holding him, and the struggle had nowhere to go. The other 2 riders from Gorthak's group stood with their hands raised, watching their employer being restrained, making the very sensible decision that whatever they were being paid was not enough for this. Silas watched Gorthak be bound with the expression of a man completing a long overdue task. Then he turned and looked at Rowan. "Good throw," he said. Rowan looked at his own hand, which had already reached for the axe by reflex. He let it go. "Habit," he said. Silas walked onto the dock properly now and addressed Maela directly. "We have Garrow's testimony. We have 2 other miners willing to speak. Combined with the original documents you carry, the case is solid enough to take to the Crown Court at Millbrook." He looked at the oilcloth bundle she had brought out with her. "Are those—" "My father's maps," she said, "and the deed documents. Original, stamped with his registry mark." Silas nodded slowly. "Then I'd like to escort you to Millbrook," he said, "with your permission." Maela looked at the bundle in her hands. She looked at the river. She looked at Rowan. He gave a slight nod. The kind that means go. They had Gorthak secured and his riders disarmed within the next half-hour. Silas's garrison was efficient and did not waste words. 2 riders stayed behind to process the detainees for transport to Bloodstone. The others would escort Maela north at first light, as the sun dropped fully below the iron peaks in the west. Rowan sat on the deck of the raft with his legs hanging over the side, watching the Tescan go dark. The water turned from gold to bronze to a deep, moving black. A few lights came on along the far bank. Someone, somewhere, was burning a cook fire that smelled like pine and salted meat. Maela sat beside him. She had handed the documents to Silas for safekeeping overnight and looked lighter for it. Not happy, exactly. The kind of less heavy that comes after you have been carrying something for a long time. "He will hang," she said. Not a question. "Silas seems like the kind of man who sees things through," Rowan said. She was quiet for a moment. "My father used to sit on the raft exactly like this," she said, "at the end of the day, watching the water." Rowan said nothing. There was nothing to add to that. After a while she said, "I will go to Millbrook. I will give the testimony. I will recover what can be recovered." She paused. And then you'll have options," he said. "That's different from before." She looked at him. "The raft needs a new portside railing." "Yes, it does. And the roof seam on the north corner is leaking." "I saw that. And the stove chimney will need relining before winter." Rowan looked at the cabin, dark and still now. The old lantern, throwing a small, warm square of light through the window onto the deck. He thought about his father, who had built boats all his life and never owned one. He thought about the copper, the single coin that had started all of this. "The raft's big enough," he said, "for a carpenter who needs a workshop and a minekeeper who needs somewhere to come back to." Maela looked at the river for a long time. "Then I'll come back," she said. They sat there while the Tescan carried the night downstream around them, and the cook fire on the far bank burned down to coals, and the stars came out one at a time over the iron peaks, quiet and permanent, indifferent to all the things that men and orcs arrange between themselves in the hours just before everything changes.